All right. Right, I'll start with you. Name one condition a process will be forced to leave the CPU or leaves the CPU voluntarily. Now the guy behind you, yeah? Any idea? A process is executing in the running state. Now it's no longer in the running state. Why? Quantum, what's wrong with the quantum?
Quantum is when
Well, not what the quantum is. You said, what's the reason for leaving? You said quantum. Why would a process leave? It might need some input. Yeah, give me another reason. Another reason why a process leaves the CPU. Yeah, anybody here? When the process has finished, normally terminated. Any other reasons? If it needs if there is a page fault, yeah. Any other reason? Anybody else? If it divides by 0, these are all errors. Any more? Any more? Any other reasons? What about the quantum? When the quantum starts, does it leave the CPU?
yes.
Pardon? When the quantum is exceeded, that's what you should have said earlier. Not just quantum. Quantum alone doesn't mean anything. What's a quantum anyway? A process is allowed to keep the CPU for a cycle or. And what if a process does not leave the CPU? What happens? Any idea? If a process holds on to the CPU for a long time. What's a preemptive system? A preemptive system. Right, I'm going to see few students, a lot of students here next semester, doing the same course. Unless they really put in a lot of effort, of course. Oh, no, thank you for volunteering. I have another volunteer here. What's a preemptive system? Okay, but now, sorry. Go on. What's a preemptive system? Yeah, a system that interrupts a process. Because once it's running, it's a process. And takes a resource away from it. All right. Who can describe a round-robin algorithm? Yeah?
And each process takes the same amount of time to run the CPU.
Start again.
And each process gets the same amount of time.
Every process, all the processes that need the CPU, each one of them gets the CPU for the same length of time, unless it leaves it earlier. And that's the one that uses the quantum. If a process keeps the CPU for longer than the quantum, and then the system will interrupt it and remove it, where will it send it? To the ending state, or the blocked state, or the new state, or the ready state? Are you sure? Or it's the ready state. And if a process has the CPU, and it needs an input or output. What state it will go to? The waiting state or the blocked state, it's called, either. The person who wants to set up the length of the quantum asks you, how good is a good length of a quantum? What would you recommend to them? 20 seconds? An hour? I have 50 processes, 100 processes running simultaneously. So what would be a good recommendation? Long quantum is a good answer. No, it's a good idea, but it's not the right answer. Anybody here? It's good. Sure. Okay, I'm not even asking now should it be longer or shorter, but okay. So he said for interactive processes, should your recommendation be go for longer quantum or shorter quantum? Shorter quantum. What's wrong with the long quantum? Any idea? Yeah, it takes a longer time to switch between one process to the next. Yeah, what's wrong with that? So there's a lot of context switching. So is that a bad thing? Any idea? This last week we were doing some other things, right? You didn't even look at the.
I feel so.
You feel what? I think you need a holiday. We'll send you to New York for a week. Okay, guys, long quantum. Is it a good idea or a bad idea? Okay, the recommendation, guys, for the length of a quantum. Any idea?
The average
Pardon?
something close to what the average
No, not turnaround time. Anybody else? Anybody wants? Okay. Really, the quantum is to make sure no process will take the CPU for a long time, right? And then you need to step in, the system needs to step in and interrupt the process and take away the CPU. But we don't want to be interrupting every process. So you should be really only interrupting the long processes. So ideally, you should set your quantum up to allow 80% of your processes to run without interruption. If all your processes are longer, then most likely your quantum is going to be longer as well. But the short processes, there's no need to interrupt them. They're already quick. They won't take the CPU. So there's no point of, say, if a process is going to take 20 milliseconds to interrupt it twice before it finishes. So let them run. That's generally 80% of your processes run without interruption. Only interrupt the long processes. If you keep interrupting every process so many times, then you're going to have a lot of context switches. And what's wrong with that? You have too many context switches. The CPU, every time you make a context switch, switching from one to the other, CPU is not working. But if you have too many context switches, then the CPU utilization goes down. That means you're not using the CPU a lot. Most of the time it's stopping rather than working. Anybody can think of a problem with priority systems. Priority is a system where you give a process a priority. Every process comes in, you have priority 3, you have priority 9, you have priority 1, being, say, for example, 1 is the highest priority. So if a process comes into a queue, we put it in the correct place. If it has priority 1, we say move up front. If it has priority 7, we say move a little bit back, just in front of number 8, for example, or so on. So that system will allow only the highest priority. Or sometimes what they do, they have 3 or 4 queues. This queue is for the high priority jobs. This queue for the medium high priority jobs, or number 2. And then the next queue is for, say, priority 3, the lowest priority. If maybe in our system we only have 3 priorities. So depending on your priority, the system will put you in queue 1. So all the ones in queue 1 are the same priority. You just go to the back of that queue. So if you have the same priority as another process, who do we give the CPU to? We give it to the one who's been in longer or first in the queue. So what's wrong with this kind of system? Anybody can see any problem with using priorities in any system?
Long processes may be the first ones, might be the ones with the higher priority, and slow down the response time of lower priority ones.
Yeah. So lower priorities, sometimes they take a long time to get the CPU. So if you have maybe a job waiting and has priority 5, it's sitting behind priority 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then it's waiting, and it's nearly going to get the CPU. There's only one more process in front of it. So it's happy it's going to get the CPU in the next 20 minutes of a second. And then suddenly 3 more processes come in that have higher priority. So they go in front of it, so it's pushed back again. And then every time it's nearly getting the CPU, more processes come in, and it keeps getting pushed back. And if a process doesn't get the processor for a long time, what do we call that? Anybody remembers or anybody knows? We call it starvation. So any user, a process or any other user that needs a resource, for example, you need to print something, but there are 200 people before you who are more important, and their jobs will go first. And then you say, okay, maybe by this evening, and then by this evening, more important people come in. So you are always pushed back for a day, maybe 2 days, maybe a week. We call this starvation. So if you don't get a resource for a long time, we call it starvation. And this is one of the problems you might expect to see in a priority system. So if there is a priority system, then it's possible that you can get starvation. And in some systems, if a process spends a long time in a system, the operating system takes a note of all processes, what time they put in the queue and how long have they been in the queue. And if they find in some operating systems, because long time ago, back in the 70s, they had an IBM system that's running. Hundreds of processes come in all the time, get processed and go, and more processes come in. And then they decided to update this system. They're going to replace it. They said, okay, no more processes come in. Let's just finish the ones that are running, and then we switch it off. And at the end, they found a process that's been sitting in the system for 3 years, waiting to be processed. It never got to be served. That's really starvation. It's of a low priority. Even the person who ran the program just left it, because forgot about it, it never came back. It didn't get an error, it didn't stop running, it was still sitting waiting for a chance. So it's only when they switched the whole system off that they said, okay, let's finish all the running processes, no more new processes come in. Eventually that process got to be worked. But it's, the CPU. So they decided to solve that problem. So for example, in systems where they have 3 or 4 queues, one for very important jobs, one for the next importance, like priority jobs. And if a process is of low priority in the bottom queue, they say, listen, if it spends, say, a minute or 2 minutes in that queue, okay, let's increase its priority, let's lift it up. So we help get it out. We know it's not that important, but it should not even, no important jobs should not stay there forever. So what they do is they gradually improve its importance. In some systems they have multiple queues, so they move it from the queue where it should be, put it into a higher queue. So hopefully it will get, because everybody in that queue, queue number 3 will be served before anybody in queue 4. So anybody in Q4 has to be served after when Q1 is empty, Q2 is empty, Q3 is empty, and then only Q4 is left empty. And if it even in Q2 doesn't get served, or if Q3 doesn't get served, they move its priority to number 2. So they keep improving its priority until it gets out of the system. So that solves that problem. They call it aging. Aging, like getting on with age. So if a process goes into the system and spends a long time, they say it's aging in the system, it's getting old in the system. It shouldn't be in the system. Let's get rid of it, let's move it. Let's help it process. So the problem of aging happens in priority systems. And how do they resolve that problem? By improving or increasing the priority of that process in the system. Depending on the system. Some systems, they only have one queue. Important jobs, like every time they want to put a job, they have to find out where in the queue. They say, oh, you have priority 2. People, yeah, go in there between 1 and 3. Or at the end of all the queue, the process that have the same priority. But in most other systems that use priority, they say, let's have a different queue for each priority. So it's easier. You, priority 3, go to queue number 3. You, priority 1, go to queue 1. So every time the manager wants to give the processor to one of the processes, it always goes to Q1. Is there anybody in Q1? No. Well, then we go to Q2 and we give a process to somebody in Q. Until Q1 and 2 are empty, then we go to number 3, and so on. So priorities, sometimes they use multiple queues. Okay. If you were to manage the process, another question, what are the things you need to improve? How do we measure that you are a good manager? How do you check if you see 2 process systems, processor management systems, they both work? How do you know which one is better? Which one is managing the CPU better?
Middle allocation?
Pardon?
Middle allocation of processes?
How do you, what do you mean? This one.
Each will take more time, each will take less time.
Okay, what do we call that? Okay.
Maximize.
You want to maximize what?
CPU utilization.
CPU utilization. We look at the system that actually uses CPU most. If in one system it uses 98% of the time utilized, and the other system is 91, then the one that uses the CPU 98% of the time is better. Yeah. Any other measurements? I can't hear you. I know what? Maximize what? Throughput. Yeah. This is in any system. You walk into any factory and they ask you, what do you think of our production? You say, hey, well, if you're maximizing your throughput, that means if you're doing more work in any given day, then that's a good system. If you make any changes, and tomorrow we actually produce more stuff, that means, yeah, throughput. So throughput is a good measurement as well. Not very accurate in our case, but yeah. Anything else? What other measurements do we use for managing the CPU? Turnaround. Oh, thank you. Minimizing the turnaround time. The average turnaround time for processes. And what's the turnaround time? What's the definition of turnaround time? Any idea? What's the turnaround time? What do you mean, no? That's not the definition. From the time of submission of a process until the time of termination. That's called turnaround time. And the average is like for each process undivided. So we try to reduce that time. So if you have 2 systems that work, which one is better? You check the average turnaround time. If they have the same processes, run them, and then run the same process on another system, and see which one will produce the lowest turnaround time, or you said the lowest, what was it, response time, did you say? Response time as well. so remember the measurements, the factors that are used to measure the performance of a system in CPU, in processor management. Things that some factors you need to maximize, increase, like CPU utilization or throughput, and there are other factors that you want to reduce, and that's like turnaround time and yeah. And you don't want systems to be starved, and some processors are getting the CPU all the time and others are starved. You try to have fair system if you can, without negatively affecting the rest of the system. Yeah?
And priority systems have
Do priority systems have what?
low failure. Low failure.
Priority systems, the important, their aim is that they give priority to high priority jobs. And if they do that, then they've succeeded in their aim. But sometimes they can cause a problem. It's called aging. What's aging problem? No, does not sit in the CPU for a long. Yeah, in the queue, sorry, I thought you said in the CPU, yeah. Okay, so if a process stays in the system for a long time, we call it aging. And that's why it sits in the system for a long time, because it has low priority. The system doesn't give it what it needs, because it's not an important process. And how do we solve the aging problem? How would you solve the aging problem for some processes? By changing their priority, you say this job priority is 5, no, let's make it 4. So it might get slightly better chance. And if it still stays for a long time, we might change it to 3, 2, 1, until it becomes very important. And hopefully it will get the CPU and leave